My family took a vote on a Sunday afternoon. The question was whether to sell the house I live in, the house I have lived in for 41 years. 3 hands went up for yes. Mine was the only one for no. My son Dale wrote the tally on the back of a grocery receipt, the way you'd jot down who wanted pizza, and they were so calm about it, so reasonable. Nobody shouted. They just explained, very gently, that it was time for me to be practical. None of them checked one thing before they counted. They all believed the house belonged to the family. It did not. And by the end of that week, I had read every line of the deed. Let me tell you what it said and why their certainty almost fooled me too. Almost. Marion and I bought this house in 1983. We were young and broke, and the roof leaked over the second bedroom for 2 years before we could afford to fix it. We raised 3 children here, Dale, then Kathy, then Brian. She's still here in a way. Those marks on the door frame are our kids' heights, year by year. That chip in the kitchen tile is where Brian dropped a cast iron pan when he was 14. Marion planted the dogwood out front the spring before she got sick. She passed 4 years ago. I won't dress it up. The first winter alone in this house was the hardest thing I've done. But I stayed. Because when I sit in the quiet, I can still hear her telling me to take my shoes off at the door. So when my children started calling the house an asset, something in me went, still. To them, it was a number on a real estate site. To me, it was the only place on earth where my wife still felt close. That difference is the whole story. Keep it in mind, because everything they did next, they did with a straight face and a kind voice, and it took me a while to see it for what it was. It started with Dale, my oldest. He's 50 now, and he's stretched thin in ways he doesn't talk about. A second mortgage, 2 kids heading toward college. He is not a bad man. I want you to hear me say that. One evening, he sat on the porch with me and said, real careful, that he'd been worried about me rattling around in a house this size. Worried. That was the word he kept using. Worried about the stairs. Worried about the upkeep. Worried about what would happen if I fell and nobody was here. But at 72, you learn to hear the difference. You know when someone is worried about you, and you know when someone is worried about a house that could pay off their debt. Dale had wrapped the second one inside the first, and I think he'd half convinced himself it was all the same feeling. Then, Kathy started calling more. My daughter is anxious by nature, always has been. She's 50 years old and terrified of her own retirement, and I understood that fear was doing a lot of the talking. She'd say things like, Dad, wouldn't it be nice to be somewhere smaller, somewhere with no yard work? As if I'd been complaining about my yard. I hadn't. I like my yard. Brian was the most honest of the 3, if you can call it that. He didn't bother with worried. He just said the money would change his life. A down payment. A fresh start. He looked me in the eye when he said it, and I'll give him that. 3 of my children. 3 different fears, all pointing at the same door. My door. And not one of them had asked the only question that mattered. They just assumed the answer. They called it a family meeting. Sunday dinner, all of them, plus Dale's daughter Nora, who is 26 and the only one who visits me for no reason at all. We ate first. Roast chicken. Pleasant conversation. And when the plates were cleared, Dale folded his hands and said he wanted to talk about the future as a family. He'd done his homework. He had a printout of comparable home sales in the neighborhood. He had a number the house could fetch. He laid it all out like a man presenting to a board, calm and organized, and he framed it as the responsible thing to do while the market was strong. Then he said the sentence I keep turning over. He said, I think we should put it to a vote. It affects all of us. All of us. As if my home were a shared account. As if the years I put into that mortgage were shares of stock we'd split at a shareholder meeting. I looked around the table at the faces of the children I raised in that house, and I understood that in their minds it had already stopped being mine. Dale voted yes. Brian voted yes. Kathy looked at her lap, and then she voted yes too. I said no. Nora didn't raise her hand. She didn't say anything either, but she didn't raise her hand. I did not slam the table. I did not tell them what I thought of a man who brings a spreadsheet to his father's dinner table. I have learned that the loudest thing in a room can be a man who stays quiet. So I folded my napkin and I said I will look into what needs to happen, and I let them believe that meant yes. Then they went home, pleased with themselves, and I sat alone in the house they had just sold out from under me. And I want to be honest with you about what happened next, because it is not the part you would expect. I doubted myself. That's the part nobody tells you about getting old. When 3 of your own children look at you with kind, patient faces and tell you the same thing, you start to wonder if they can see something you cannot. Maybe I was being stubborn. Maybe I was being selfish, holding on to a house for a dead woman while my kids struggled. Maybe the stairs really were too much. I sat with that for 2 days. And on the second night, I did the thing that changed everything. I didn't call a lawyer in a rage. I didn't rehearse a speech. I got up and I went to the closet and I pulled down the metal box where Marion kept our papers. Because before I signed my own home away to make my children comfortable, I wanted to read with my own eyes exactly what I owned. I made a pot of coffee, I put on my glasses, and I started reading. Here is what I had forgotten in the fog of the year my wife died. After Marion passed, the kids had gently pushed me toward getting my affairs in order. They set up a meeting with an estate attorney. I was grieving. I signed where I was told to sign. And somewhere in that season, a story took hold in the family that we had put the house in the family's name so it would stay in the family. Because that is not what those papers did. What I actually did that grief-stricken year was set up a living trust. And the trust named exactly one trustee with full authority to sell, keep, rent, or leave the property to anyone at all. One person controlled that house completely, for as long as he lived, free to change his mind at any time. That person was me. My children were listed too, as beneficiaries, which is a fancy way of saying they would inherit their share someday, after I was gone, from whatever I chose to leave in the trust at that time. Revocable. That word was right there on the second page. I could revise the whole thing on a Tuesday afternoon if I wanted to. They had confused, "You'll get it when I die," with "We own it now." They had held a vote over property that belonged entirely and only to the man they'd outvoted 3-1. The part that stung came next. The attorney had explained all of this to me 4 years ago in that same office. I have a faint memory of him saying the word revocable, telling me I stayed in control of everything, no matter what anyone else wanted. But I was burying my wife that month. I signed where he pointed and let the details slide off me like rain off glass. My children heard the phrase estate planning and built an entire ownership out of it. I heard nothing at all. Grief made careless people of all of us. The difference is that only one of us ever went back and read the page. I sat there in the lamplight and I laughed. Not a mean laugh, a tired one. Because 2 days earlier I had been lying awake wondering if I was a selfish old fool for wanting to keep my own house. And the whole time, the answer was sitting in a metal box in my closet, in plain black ink. Now, you might expect the next scene to be me calling all 3 of them and reading them that deed line by line, making them squirm. I understand the appeal, I felt it, but I didn't want to win an argument. I wanted to be the kind of man Marion married. So I waited a week, and then I invited them to dinner. My dinner this time, my table. I made Marion's chicken from her recipe card. When the plates were cleared, I didn't raise my voice. I set the folder in the middle of the table, the same spot where Dale had put his spreadsheet, and I said, I looked into what needs to happen. I want to share what I found. I read them the relevant lines. Slowly. I watched Dale's face as the words landed, and I saw the exact moment the accountant in him recalculated everything. He didn't get angry. That's not his way. He got quiet and a little gray, and he said, Dad, we thought… And then he couldn't finish the sentence because there was no honest way to finish it. Kathy started to cry, and I believe those tears were real, and I believe some of them were about being caught. Both things can be true. Brian said, "So you're keeping it." And there it was, the whole thing, stripped of the worry costume. Not, "Are you okay, Dad?" Just, "Are we getting the money or not?" I looked at each of them, and I said the only thing I'd come to say. A home is not a bank account, and a family is not a board of directors. You don't get to vote on where I grieve my wife. Nobody had an answer for that. Nora reached over and held my hand. She was the only one who had understood that from the start. The next week, I went back to that same estate attorney. And no, I didn't cut my children out of my life. Anger is a young man's fuel, and I have spent 72 years learning that scorched earth grows nothing. But I did make some changes. I updated the trust so that the house passes when I'm gone in a way that reflects who showed up and who showed up with a spreadsheet. Nora is looked after. My children are still in there, all 3 of them, because I am their father, and love does not keep a ledger the way they tried to. I also left them each a letter, to be read after I'm gone, telling them plainly what that Sunday taught me and what I hope they learn from it before it's their turn to sit at the head of a table. This is what I've settled into, in the quiet. That vote was a gift, though they didn't mean it as one. In one afternoon, my children showed me exactly who they were when they believed I couldn't stop them. Almost nobody gets to see their own family that plainly. I did. And clarity, it turns out, is worth more than any offer on this house. Dale calls now. Just to talk. No printouts. It's a start. I've left the door open because a man can be wrong once and still be worth trusting again if he does the work. But the door is mine to open. That was always the point. I still take my shoes off at the door. I still hear her. And I'm going nowhere. If you've ever had people you love treat your life like a line item, you already know the feeling I've been describing. And you know that the strongest thing you can do is not shout. It's to quietly find out where you actually stand and then stand there. There's another story I want to tell you next about a woman whose family tried the same thing with her savings and what she found when she finally read the fine print. It's on the screen now. I think you'll want to hear how that one ends.